Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there's no doubt that the Budget Control Act contributed to a decline in defense spending, but I just want to put that in some perspective. The defense budget bottomed out at an eye-popping $586 billion in FY15. And despite that decline, we still spend more than the next 7 nations combined, and that includes several of our allies. So what have we gotten with all that money? I read the first line in the Commission report, which says, quote, "The security and well-being of the United States are at greater risk than any time in decades." So let me ask the question this way, Ambassador Edelman. This can't just be about money, because if money could solve this problem, we would have solved it already. Assume just for a minute that the 2020 budget cap of $576 billion will not be lifted. How would you prioritize between force structure, readiness, and modernization and still stay within that cap?
You know, I think that hypothetical question, Senator Warren, is difficult to answer unless you make some preliminary judgments about what it is you don't want to do. In other words, you know, what is it that we are going to stop doing? Are we going to stop the fight against ISIS? Are we going to get out of Afghanistan? Are we going to be less willing to protect the South China Sea or Taiwan or reinforce our allies in Europe? I mean, because at that level of spending, you will not be able to do all of those things, which are all things that the current strategy says we should do, albeit taking some risks in some areas.
I'm sorry, but it's not really a strategy just to keep saying more. We have to talk about priorities. You know, the United States will spend more than $700 billion on defense this year alone. That's more in real terms than President Ronald Reagan spent during the Cold War. It's more than everything the federal government spends on highways, education, medical research, border security, housing, the FBI, disaster relief, the State Department, foreign aid, everything else in the discretionary budget put together. And I've heard a lot of talk about a hollow military in recent years. But if we continue to prioritize investment in defense at the expense of infrastructure, education, basic research, then we will have a hollow country. Our nation's strength flows directly from our competitiveness in these areas, and we need to stop treating domestic policy and national security as if they're unrelated to each other. You want to talk about what we're not doing. What we're not doing is making a lot of investments we need to make this country stronger. So let me ask a question from a different perspective. Ambassador Edelman, the Commission recommended that Congress should, quote, hold the Secretary accountable for ensuring robust civilian control. So let me ask on that. I want to dig in on the question that Senator Reid started with. What specific recommendations do you have for us on that? What questions should we be asking DoD leaders, both in civilian and uniform, when they come before this committee?
Senator Warren, before I take that on, I do want to get back to the first issue you raised. I actually agree with you on the need for adequate domestic spending on infrastructure, and I think all of those things that you cited are things that also contribute enormously to the national security. And it's one reason why I think the Budget Control Act is so poorly designed, because the long-term debt issue, if you look at the CBO's 20-year projections, is clearly driven by Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. It's entitlement spending, not discretionary spending. And the problem that we have is that we spend all our time fighting with one another over which pieces of this shrinking discretionary pie we get. And I think that's not good for the health of the country at home or abroad. On the civil military issue.
Surely you're not saying you think we should cut Social Security so that we can spend more money on defense.
No, I think we need to reform our entitlement spending so that we're not
You can't use the word reform as a way to elide the fundamental question, and that is the priorities about where we're spending our money. And whether we should be spending, I just wanted to hear about priorities. Right. Because we are spending this year $700 billion on defense. And the only priority I hear from you and from this report is more. And that can't be an answer.
I agree. There's no amount of money we can spend that gets us out of the conundrum that we're facing with Russia and China. And the report goes at great length to say that in addition to sufficient resources, we need new operational concept and other new capabilities that may in the long run save us money, but I don't think are a magic bullet. On the civil military piece, ma'am, I would say that I don't think there's new legislation that's needed. I think there's plenty of authority in Title X for civilians to do their job. I think what's really important is for those jobs to be filled and for people to be there occupying it. I think we have at least one, I think maybe two assistant secretary positions in OSD policy that are vacant right now. Those jobs just need to be filled and need to be filled in a timely manner. And we need some longevity in those positions so that people can amass the experience that allows them to deal as equals with their military peers.
Well, I appreciate your raising the point. You know, our uniformed service members are incredibly talented. I know that everyone wants to hear their opinions and values it. But there's a reason that the Constitution puts the hard calls on the civilian part of government, and we need to make sure that's strong enough to handle those calls.
I completely agree.
Thank you.